thanks everyone for coming. My name is Michael Walls. I'm director of DPU. And please excuse if my head sort of gets cut off in funny angles. It's just, we're struggling with the unusual reality at the moment of a relatively bright London winter's day. Not something you need to worry about too often. But today it's just meaning that the light from my window is kind of causing my head to take weird shapes. So I'll just have to ask you to take it on trust that I do have a complete head. Alex, do you want to tell people a little bit about how to ask questions? I think we're going to ask them to use the Q&A, is that right?
Yeah, I would direct you to the Q&A section for your questions. Please feel free to ask questions at any point. Yeah, we'll do our best to answer them when we can. Great.
So if you just type, you'll see the little button for Q&A at the bottom of your screen. Hopefully, feel free to type in there at any stage if you have any questions, and we'll make sure there's some time at the end to answer those. As I said, my name is Michael Walls. I'm the director of DPU, and I'm a professor of development politics and economy here. I'm going to talk a little bit, and then I'll hand over to my colleague, Professor Cassidy Johnson, who will take you through a bit more on DPU. What I'll talk about is a bit more sort of the background and the context of DPU. Now, I don't know what all of your backgrounds are. I don't know whether you are just finishing undergraduate degrees at UCL or whether you're somewhere else. So I'm going to start off with a little bit of context about UCL itself. But the reason I'm going to do that, and apologies if you know some of this, but I think it's important because I want to say a few things about where DPU sits in relation to all of that. So let me share my screen and we will get on with it. Okay, so welcome to this session. Hopefully we can answer some questions for you, give you some useful background. Hopefully everyone can also see this well enough. So as I said, I want to just say a few words about sort of where DPU sits within UCL, and I want to start off with that by just making a couple of comments about UCL itself. Now, UCL, if you've done any research or you've studied at UCL already, you know that we were started in 1826, and you've probably come across that auto icon, it's called, of Jeremy Bentham there, and you can see the sort of Warhol-esque images of Bentham on the screen right now. Now, the reason I'm putting that there is because I wanted to make the point that UCL started in 1826 with a commitment to, the way we talk about it is disruptive thinking. And it's disruptive thinking in the sense that UCL as a university prides itself on having been the first university in this country, England, to welcome students regardless of their religious or social background. Now, that's a big deal, of course. We think of universities typically as predominantly secular these days in most certainly Anglophone countries and many others, but it was the first in England to do that. It was also the first university in England to welcome women to university education. Another really critical milestone, which rightly we take as a given now, was not a given not that long ago. We were also the first in England to teach some subjects you might find a little bit surprising. English, for example, German, chemistry, engineering, and so on. And that commitment to a university that was dedicated to thinking openly about the key issues of the day, but in a way that includes people from across society, is fundamental. And that carried through into that last point about being the first university in England to introduce a fully open access university press in the form of UCL Press. So that first point is really just, I think DPU sits really well with that legacy of being a part of a university that prides itself on that idea of disruptive thinking. We're also, it's important to say, league tables are whatever they are. In a way, they mean a lot, in a way they don't. But it's probably indicative of, I think, the importance of research and the strength of teaching at UCL, that we do manage to make the top 10 consistently across many university league tables globally. 8th in the world in the 2022 QS ratings, 4th in Europe and 4th in the UK. That changes a little bit sometimes, and I don't want to go on too long about that because league tables are only one way of looking at a university. but it probably is a useful bit of information to share. It's also worth saying, and the point here I want to make is not so much how many Nobel laureates there are or whatever, it's that it's an incredibly diverse community, both the teaching community at UCL and also the student community. As a university, we offer 440 undergraduate programs, we offer 675 postgraduate programs, and we had at that count 43,800 students. It's actually in the current year almost, it's a little higher than that, below 50, with 14,300 employees. So lots of people from lots of different countries studying lots of different things across a number of different disciplines, many disciplines across 11 faculties, and including some very preeminent individuals in our alumni. Now, I wanted to show this slide because I think it starts to speak directly to some of the connections between UCL and DPU itself. And particularly if you look across the icons on the bottom right, UCL is really intimately engaged in these issues specifically about global health, sustainable cities, human well-being, cultural understanding, some of the transformational changes in society that are occurring because of changes in, amongst other things, technology, but overall about justice and equality, and thinking about what an inclusive and sustainable future could look like in the areas that we're talking about. And that, from DPU's point of view, is intrinsically interdisciplinary in a way that is, in a lot of senses, unique to the area of development planning. Those are difficult problems, so of course, talking about those problems has to involve multifaceted, quite sophisticated understandings of a lot of competing issues. And that's really where we see ourselves as working from a pedagogical and a research and a consultancy point of view. And the last point here, before I move on to talking a little bit more about DPU itself, is to underline the point I made before. It's an incredibly diverse community. 53% across UCL international students, but actually within DPU, it's far higher than that. The percentage is pushing up to 70% or thereabouts of international fee-paying students, and over 80% if we're talking about the identification with a country outside of the UK. Staff within UCL and with DPU are similarly international. Many have also studied abroad, worked abroad, and so bring a wealth of experience from many different places. And that's the point I wanted to make on that slide. Now, moving on to positioning DPU specifically within UCL, I think one of the points is we sit as UCL and as DPU at the heart of one of the world's most dynamic cities in the form of London. And I like this map because it shows just how central we are to a number of the things that you probably recognize as probably landmarks of London. And if you look carefully at the map, you might be able to pick out Tower Bridge over there on the left-hand side. There's the London Eye there, but DPU there right in the middle of that with UCL, and the UCL logo there points to the main building of UCL, the one with the dome on it called the Wilkins Building. If you've studied at UCL, you know that well, but if you haven't, that's the iconic image that you'll see over and over again in images of UCL and in the logo itself. DPU, 2 blocks away from that central campus building, surrounded by UCL faculty and department buildings and premises all around us, and situated in a beautiful location of Bloomsbury in central London, which is bordered by squares and parks that you can see in the map image there, and really at the heart of everything that's going on in London itself. DPU then, well, we've been around for quite a long time, actually, not as long as UCL. We didn't start in 1826, but we have been operating as a development planning unit, although the name changed early on, for 68 years now, working with postgraduate teaching and now a lot of research and consultancy as well. And that the words there are DPU's kind of statement of our overriding vision, that what our purpose. What we are here to do is conduct world-leading research and postgraduate teaching that helps to build the capacity of governments, authorities, NGOs, aid agencies, and businesses, private sector, working towards socially just and sustainable development in the global south. For us, development planning is critical if we are to talk about addressing some of the most critical issues of today. Planning is really the central idea that we are not just passive participants in a world that's facing huge challenges in terms of, at the moment, obviously climate change and pandemic, so health planning, but more broadly, inequality and some of the key issues that the world really needs to grapple with if it's to continue to move forward in a way that is, at least to the degree possible, as inclusive and reasonably just as possible. DPU was founded in 1954. That's where the 68 years comes from. And it was founded at the very beginning. And if you think about 1954, that was in the period when the British Empire was breaking up and countries were starting to move towards independence. And the independence, the post-colonial era kicked in very quickly after that. Now, DPU was founded with the aim of trying to set up some kind of London-based center for work and study on development planning that incorporated global South perspectives. And that was radical in its own date. So back to that point that I was making at the beginning about, I think DPU fits very comfortably within a university that is talking about the disruptive thinking that is at the core of our spirit, because DPU was founded with that kind of sense of trying to introduce a disruptive element to thinking about development planning at a time when there was an obvious need, but not a lot of movement to try and incorporate genuine global South perspectives in what was a rapidly changing world at that time and remains so now. DPU joined UCL in 1971. Initially, we were a part of the Architecture Association, and we were focused on what was called at that stage tropical architecture. But one of the key features of that is that it's not really architecture. It's as much about the social sciences and the complexity of understanding how people live as it is about designing spaces. Our MPhil PhD program was launched in the mid-1980s, and our roster of MSCs grew significantly through the 1990s, so that today we run 7 MSCs and the MPhil PhD program, and have an annual intake, fluctuates slightly from year to year, but it's about 260 students at the moment. So we would love to welcome you to DPU. I'm going to hand over in a second to Professor Johnson, who is going to talk through the programs in a little bit more detail. But in the meantime, I just want to make sure that you've got on the link on the page as early as possible, that link, which is to the DPU website. I'm sure you've looked at it, but please use that to go and do some more research as you wish on the programs that we offer and what might suit you best. I also wanted to make the comment that applications, we do get lots of applications each year. It's quite a competitive process. We process them in batches in order to try and manage that process as fairly and quickly as possible. So it does mean get in early to maximize your chances. So good luck with that if you do submit an application. And I'm going to hand over now to my colleague, Professor Johnson. So thanks for listening to me, and please do post any questions you have in the questions and answers. Cassidy, over to you.
Thank you, Michael. I'll just, yeah, so my name is Cassidy Johnson. I've been at DPU since 2007, and I teach across some of the different master's programs and have taught in the past across 3 of the master's programs. So Michael asked if I would come today and tell you a little bit about how the different masters and how they work. So we have, as Michael said, 7 master's programs, and these can be taken either full-time or part-time. Generally, the master's the MSc is a 1-year MSc program, but can be taken part-time if you wish. And the first program that we have is the MSc in Building and Urban Design and Development. And this MSc is more focusing on design elements and around sort of the production of urban form. And I would say is more attractive to people who are interested in design parts of development. All of the masters we have are open to anyone from different academic backgrounds. So you don't have to be a designer, for example, to study the Building and Urban Design program. But if you're interested in those elements, you may be interested in this program. The second program we have is the MSc in Development Administration and Planning. This is one of our very popular master's programs. And it really, I would say, focuses, if we compare across the others, focuses is quite interested on national level development, and regional development. And it's interested in how policy and program and community level interventions can employ social justice and address key development challenges. I would say all of the programs across DPU are interested in these elements of social justice. This is a program that's particularly interesting for people who may want to work in national government or regional governments or local government. We have an MSc in Environment and Sustainable Development. This is particularly good for people who are interested in environmental issues. And this program works a lot with the concept of environmental justice and looking at socio-environmental changes. So it's quite interested in how the environment is shaping urban development and also how development shapes the environment. And deals with a lot of issues also around climate change, around infrastructure. And our next program is the MSc Health in Urban Development. We have, this is actually quite a new program. I think this next year will be its third year running and is becoming more and more popular. So we started with a few students and now building up to a very good body of students this year. And we started this program particularly because there's a sort of gap in knowledge, I think, between looking at urban development and development planning on the one side and urban health on the other side. And so what we thought was that there's a necessity to bring professionals into development planning that have a really good understanding on sort of how urban living impacts on people's health, and particularly around informality and health disparities. So this is also a very interesting program and quite cutting edge. We have an MSc in Urban Economic Development. This is particularly looking at the economic perspectives of city development. Is very popular with people who come from an economics background, but equally, as I said, with all the programs, you don't have to have an economics background for this. There's quite a big component of studying what is happening in London in part of this program. And our sixth master's program is the MSc in Urban Development Planning. This is actually the oldest MSc that we have. And this looks particularly at urban issues, although most of the programs in DPU focus largely on urban issues, except for the development administration planning. This one is really focused on urban planning, and particularly around social and spatial justice, and you look at a lot of the issues around looking at sort of critical urbanism and these contemporary challenges for city planning. So this is quite interesting for people who might be interested in working in city governments or with organizations that work with city governments. And our last MSc is the MSc in Social Development Practice. Sorry, I shouldn't say our last MSc, the seventh MSc program we have. And this one particularly is interested in looking at how I'd say intersectionality in cities, looking at gender, and understanding particularly at how people and a people-centered view on how people are impacted by different ways of urbanization, different ways of living. And so really looks at that from this central perspective of the person and issues of inequality and diversity in that. As Michael also, Professor Walls mentioned, we also have the MPhil program. And this is a self-selected academic study. And it's usually a 3-year program. And people who come into this program will do the first year as an MPhil, and the second and third year are doing the field work for your PhD and writing up your PhD. So I'm not sure if anyone on this call is interested in that, but just to mention that that is also a very important program in DPU. And we look at all kinds of issues around development planning. And you can look on our website and see some of the current theses that are being taught. Sorry, I forgot to mention in the master's programs that the master's programs are run over 3 terms. So we have 2 taught terms in from October, the end of September up until middle of December. We have a second term that runs from January until the end of April, or sorry, end of March. And then we have a third term in which we do a practice engagement, working in different ways with communities from the Global South. We have a long history of doing that in DPU, and you can read on our website many of the different experiences that the MSc students have had in working with different communities. Usually we work with, each MSc program works with a different organization in the Global South to do a practical piece of work. So that happens in May and June. And then the rest of the year, which will be sort of June, July, August, is around doing your MSc dissertation. And in that, you'll work with a dissertation supervisor one-on-one to develop your piece of research. So those are sort of in a nutshell the master's programs and how it works. But we're open to any questions if you have. Thank you.
Thanks, Cassidy. That's great. Over to you. I don't know whether anyone has any specific questions that we haven't addressed. I hope that gives you a sort of flavor of the programs that we're offering at DPU, but we're happy, and if you could put them in the question and answer, we're happy to answer them that way. You should also be able to post, I think, in chat. But I can't see any questions at the moment, so perhaps everyone is sort of happy. Maybe we've answered everyone's questions, I don't know. But do go ahead and type them into either chat or Q&A if you want to. If there are no questions, then I'll take it that this introduction has sort of been hopefully helpful for you in understanding a bit more about DPU, what our history is, and the programs that we offer. I would encourage you to go and write on the, check on the website all the programs. Hannah Chatterjee has just asked a question about studying part-time as an international student. Actually, I have to confess, I'm not 100% sure on the visa regulations for the UK in the coming year, because they do change periodically. But as I understand it, it can be a little bit difficult to get a visa to study part-time. Unfortunately, that's a UK government policy, so it's not one that we have control over. However, UCL does have an international office which is very equipped to answer questions about visas, and will be able to give you a very clear answer, the one that I haven't been able to give you just now. So I'm sorry, Hannah, I honestly am not 100% sure of what the current visa regime is for part-time students, but I think it is pretty difficult to get a visa for part-time study if you do require one. Is work experience mandatory is another question. No, it's not. We typically have some students with work experience and some without. In fact, there's a majority often without. Cassidy, do you have anything to add on to work experience?
Work experience, yes. Well, I guess it varies slightly across the masters, but generally, yes, we want to see work experience because you get a lot more out of the MSc if you come in with work experience.
Do you want to continue and answer? There's a question about career opportunities in urban design and with a master's from in development planning.
Yeah, sure. That's so within DPU we have a number of things that we do around career. So one is we have in the dissertations, you have the opportunity to work with different organizations in developing your dissertation. We also have a number of career sessions across the year. So we have a career, we bring in people who went to DPU, who've gone on to have different kinds of careers, as well as having talks from different people, as well as use of UCL career services, etc., as well as general talks about career, but particularly around the what we call the BUD program, the Building in Urban Design and Development. I mean, for those people who do have a design background, it's often they come into the BUD program, say they're an architect and interested in, have become disillusioned with architecture and sort of standard architecture practice, and come into DPU because they want to move their design career into a different realm. And so the people who come from that background will often go on to work in different kinds of fields. Some people end up working in international development organizations, so might work for example, for NGOs or for multilateral organizations, multilaterals, such as working for the World Bank or one of the development banks. Others might go on to develop sort of new organizations around doing design in a different way. We work with this architects-based organization, for example, in Southeast Asia, called the CAN Architects, and I'm trying to remember the acronym of it right now, but it's basically on community architecture. And so this is like an association of architects who work on community architecture, and there's a sort of big movement of that internationally. So a lot of people end up working for those kind of organizations. Some people go back and work for architecture firms, but might work on different kinds of projects that are more sort of community architecture or development related things. I hope that answers your question. If you tell me your background exactly, I could probably answer it a bit more specifically.
Thanks, Cassidy. So yeah, absolutely. That question was about design. Of course, if you ask a question about planning from a sort of maybe national development perspective or a local government perspective, there's a whole lot of diversity there as well. Another source of students is from national ministries or national government that are paying for students to study, in which case they will typically go back and work in those ministries. A lot of students will join, as Cassidy just mentioned, the World Bank, certainly also UN agencies, international NGOs, and so on, where there's an interest in understanding how planning can be used. And planning is something that can be defined in different ways. So planning is not necessarily just a spatial thing. It can be about development planning in the sense of national development planning, for example. So that can be about organizations that have an interest in trying to use a planning approach or use a deliberate sort of the concept of deliberate intervention to think about how development processes and outcomes can be improved. Environmentally, in terms of sustainability, but also socially and so on. So there's a lot of diversity across the ground, but exactly as Cassidy said, because the question was about design, there is that strong sort of element. We're not all disillusioned architects though, so there are certainly some disillusioned architects there, but it's not the only source of students or source of careers for graduates. Hannah is asking also about funding opportunity for doing research abroad during the dissertation term. As with everything, there's a long answer and there's a short answer. The short answer is yes, there are opportunities. The long answer is those opportunities are typically competitive, but actually for us, we have a slightly different structure from a lot of master's programs, in the sense that the third term, as Cassidy was describing before, is focused on a practice engagement. Now, the practice engagement has elements of virtual engagement, online engagement, live with actual partners, and also when we can, travel. So going to a country for a visit to the location of the case that we're working with, the collaboration, the partners we're working with. Now, through the pandemic, that's been difficult because we've had travel restrictions to deal with. And there's always a combination of the two elements. But it means that actually there is less less emphasis. In fact, we discourage taking on too much overseas travel for research in the dissertation term because the term is too short to accommodate that. So there are funding opportunities, but it's actually a more complicated area. We also have a fellowships program in dissertations, which is designed explicitly not to provide funding for travel, but to provide an opportunity for students writing dissertations to work with a partner virtually on developing their research. So it gives an opportunity for primary research. So within the degree, there is certainly, there's not just the opportunity, but the need. It's a compulsory part of the practice modules to do research with partners abroad. But whether that falls into the dissertation term or the second and third terms depends on exactly the nature of the particular program and individuals' taught path. So I hope that, like I said, there was a short answer and there was a long answer. That was the long answer. The short answer was yes, there are opportunities, but they tend to be competitive, and there's a bit more to it. Lumi is asking, does the MSc in Urban Development Planning have any policy, politics, community development components, or is it much more spatially and design focused? Cassidy, you can probably talk about that. Yeah.
Yeah, I've taught on this program, and yeah, the MSc UDP, as we call Urban Development Planning, is focused on very much on policy, politics, and community development, and it is much less. It doesn't have that much focus on spatial or design, and it's particularly interested with understanding how and why the city is planned and built the way that it is, and critiquing that, and works also on this idea of this room for maneuver. So what are those kind of politics, what are those ways that particularly people who work in development planning as professionals can position themselves to make change in cities and to bring about transitions, and it has also interesting components where you reflect on who am I the planner. So you write an essay thinking about who you are and how do you position yourself both ethically and sort of theoretically as a planner and things like that. So there's a lot of introspection on who you become as a professional also. That answers your question.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I would also add that all of the programs at DPU are kind of one of the common threads running through them is an interest in policy, politics, and community development. You can change the context in which that policy, politics, and community development takes place. So UDP will have, Urban Development Planning will have one particular perspective on the sort of city element, the context of that, but each degree is concerned with those issues. And in that sense, I think fundamentally DPU is a unit of the social sciences, which is interested in what the practical implications of the study of those social sciences is, if you want what probably sounds like an academic definition, but it's central. Political economy is central. Community development is central to what we're talking about and how we're talking about it. Hannah has asked, do most students go on to work outside of the UK? Do international students have the opportunity to pursue jobs in the UK if they want to stay? The answer to both, well, the answer to the first one is a lot end up working outside of the UK, and it's probably a majority, which means that the answer would be yes, but it's varied. A lot also work in the UK. And I don't actually honestly know, and I don't know how you would exactly do that analysis because of course people shift around. So many start in one place and end up in another. But in terms of whether international students have the opportunity to pursue jobs in the UK, actually, that is one area where the visa regime has loosened up. And whereas I'm not 100% sure on what the situation is currently with visas for part-time study, it is relatively a little easier now for students to remain because there is a program allowing you to continue to stay in the UK for a couple of years after your program and to and to work. So yes, there are opportunities to pursue jobs in the UK if you want to stay afterwards. They're limited, of course, as all the visa regimes are. You have to meet certain requirements. There are possibilities to extend visas from that in the future, but they do control those processes. So you would need to read up on the exact circumstances. But the answer is yes, there are opportunities to pursue jobs in the UK after you've studied. There's a question, does the development planning program comprise of a significant research methods component? I don't know which development planning program you mean, in the sense that there are 7 master's programs and a PhD, which all deal with development planning in some form. But they all have, because they all have field trips and or practice engagements, which involve some kind of primary research, and the PhD program is primarily about primary research, it means that research methods is a component of all of them. We tackle research methods in different ways because there are different kinds of research. But yes, there is always a research methods component in each of the programs. Cassidy, do you want to say anything more about that, perhaps from the UDP or BUD perspectives?
On the research methods, yeah, I think there is, I mean, as you said, there's research methods within all the practice programs, practice modules, as well as within the dissertation, because you do research there. If the question is about the PhD program, the PhD in development planning, there is a whole module on research methods that's taken in the first year that everyone must complete, because of course, as a PhD student, the research method is really central to identifying your project. Yeah,
thanks. Ting Lee is asking, what do you think is the most valuable thing when you teach at DPU that you can share with us? I'd like to answer that and then ask Cassidy to answer that, because I suspect we'll have, well, we may have exactly the same answer, I'm not sure. My answer is critical thinking. That the most valuable thing I could possibly imagine teaching to students is the ability to be able to think critically about the kinds of theoretical and practical situations that we're talking about. And by critical thinking, I don't mean negative thinking. I don't mean just criticizing in the negative sense what we're discussing. I mean the ability to stand back and look at a particular development planning approach or theory or actual case study intervention and say what was good and what was bad about it, but from as dispassionate position as possible. So it means being able to analyze different policies, but also analyze theories in the sense of saying, okay, that theory is great. It's been really influential or not, or it should be influential, but it also has weaknesses. And that's always true. It's not, I'm not being negative saying that every theory is a model that approximates reality and therefore has strengths and weaknesses. That's just the reality. We know that. So critical thinking is being able to step back from that and say, so what are those strengths and what are those weaknesses? And where might it be useful and where might it not be useful? And in some cases, it might be that actually it's not going to be useful because the weaknesses are so overwhelming. And we need to be able to spot that. But we also need to be able to spot when there are strengths that can be used. So that would be my answer, critical thinking in the sense I just talked about. Cassidy, how would you answer that question?
Yeah, I think that's a good answer. I would definitely put that as part of my answer. I would also say that that DPU is centrally interested in social justice, and all of the programs do look at that in different ways. And so in being able to offer a critical view of something, we're always quite interested in, how those things impact on people and on society, and particularly from a justice perspective. And I think that the other thing that we teach is that everyone who comes out of DPU becomes a development planning practitioner in some way. And of course, we have those different programs, so people have different focuses. But in essence, what we're trying to do is give students a mix of theoretical understanding that would enable you to be, as Michael said, critical about what you're seeing, and also to put those things into practice. So there's a sort of mixture in the program between getting a good understanding of the theories that are important for you to understand, as well as how you might go about doing that. And the programs don't have, I mean, we don't give a lot of, give a lot of very kind of practical things that you might be able to learn in a kind of short course. What we're more interested in is bringing about somebody who, as Michael said, can bring that critical understanding, because you'll be confronted in working life with so many different problems. And what we're aiming to do is give you those tools to be able to make judgments and to go forward with your ideas based on those judgments.
Great, thanks, Cassidy. The next question is asking, with regard to the application process, whether work experience in the form of internships is an appropriate form of work experience for someone that's just finished an undergraduate program. Okay, again, there are short answers and long answers, but actually the answer is yes. What we typically see as significant work experience is not defined by whether it's paid or not so much as how long it is and what kind of engagement it is. So what we're interested in is, have you got a significant period? And a significant period is generally, we would take to mean kind of a cumulative year. It doesn't need to be all contiguous, but that you can put together the months there that is relevant to the degree that you're applying for, and that shows you've had a work environment engagement with that degree that supports your marks. Now, if your grades in your undergraduate degree are strong enough, then that's an additional part of the assessment. If you've reached the 2-2 level, then you need to be able to show significant relevant work experience, and then the work experience becomes more important. So I don't know the position of the person asking the question as to whether you're thinking in terms of you've got the equivalent of UK 2-2 kind of level grades, or you've got 2-1 level grades. But it does make a difference there. But again, the short answer is, yeah, it can be relevant. The problem with internships is often that they're very short, and very short is very short. And it means that if you can show that you've had 1 month's experience of working somewhere on an internship, well, it is still only 1 month. Now, if it's really relevant, it certainly we take into account, because we do look at every application and we assess every application on its own merits. So yeah, it does matter. Do put in everything you can about why you think you're qualified to take that program. They are competitive because we do get a lot of applications, but we will certainly take into consideration internships in that assessment process. Someone's asking about field work. I guess you're meaning specifically about the practice engagement. We can give, okay, so I can give you some general details about that. It differs from program to program, and there's also an element on each practice engagement in which it's actually, the nature of that engagement is, it's designed collaboratively, as in students yourselves, because we're talking about field research, are instrumental in working out exactly the nature of that research. So for that reason, as we said before, there is an element of research methodology there to help bring you as students up to a position where you're able to apply those methods in a way that answers a particular research question. So you define quite a lot of what you do there, but there is a compulsory component within the practice modules for every program, and it's fundamental to the whole of the MPhil PhD program that you will be doing some kind of field work. Now, there's a whole other issue about what field means, and whether you can do field work remotely, you can, and whether you need to be in a place. Now, as I just said before, the pandemic has meant that travel has been restricted, so it's not been possible to travel as much as we normally do. When we can, we do travel. So it means all students will go to a particular location to work on their practice engagement. But obviously, if that travel is not possible, then there are other ways of doing that. And even when travel is possible, online or virtual engagement with our collaborators, still primary data collection, still field work, that is also a central part of those practice modules. Again, Cassidy, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the field work is a central component of the master's degrees that we offer. And And I mean, as Michael said, in normal circumstances, we've always taken students to the field, and that sort of, I would say, the big highlight of the master's programs. And it is an incredible experience because I mean, I always learn so much when I go on the field trips, because sort of people open their houses and their hearts to you, and you really learn a lot about people's lives and the realities and about the planning people who work professionally also in the field. And I think, yeah, that's certainly been has changed during the pandemic, and we've been doing online, and this year we're doing most of the practice engagements are based here in the UK, working with our international partners, because that's what we've had to do because of the reality of the pandemic at the moment. So we've sort of, I think, changed the way of working a bit to this online method. Of course, we want to get back to the field as soon as possible. So hopefully that will be the reality next year. Otherwise, it will be with this sort of different way of engagement that's also, I think, has been very successful too.
Thanks, Cassidy. Yeah. The next question is, do you get a lot of African students? And okay, there's an easy answer there, which is not enough. Yeah, we get quite a lot of African students, but would always love more. So please, if that's your background, please do come. Please do apply. And
we have a new scholarship, no?
We do. Bartlett Promise, which is open to postgraduate students on an overseas fee-paying basis. So in other words, international students, and which is specifically targeted at those from sub-Saharan Africa. So please have a look on the website for the Bartlett Promise postgraduate international fees scholarship. I think that's it for questions. So perhaps if we close off there, I hope that's been helpful. If anyone has any last minute questions, you've got just a few seconds while we say our goodbyes to type something into the Q&A, and we'll answer it before we leave. But assuming no one does that, thank you very much for attending. We would love to welcome you at DPU, but it is important, as I've said a couple of times, there is quite a competitive application process, because we do get a lot more applicants than we have spaces for. So it does mean it's important that you put a good, strong application together and get it in as early as possible. Cassidy, do you want to say any final words before we close this?
I think I just realized that I forgot to say something when I spoke, so I'll just say now, which is that for each master's program, you have the core modules that you take, which are part of your master's program, as well as you have the opportunity in term 1 and term 2 to take an optional module, which comes from one of the other master's programs, or it can be just an optional module. So for example, I teach a module on disaster risk reduction in cities, that's in term 1, and we have other ones in the other terms. So you can just look online and see, because there's a choice of different modules you can take, and particularly they're often related to sort of cross-cutting issues that are useful for development planning.
Thanks everyone for joining us, and thanks Cassidy and Alex for helping and supporting this. Look forward to welcoming some of you in the new academic year.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Goodbye.